And good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I know we've got a few time zones tuning in today across North America and Europe. So people joining, please feel free to say hello in the chat and where you're tuning in from. It's great to see so many people here. And welcome to the first webinar in the Future of Work series hosted by CandidateX and TalentNet on today's subject, caregiving. We've got a really wonderful panel of thought leaders and executives speaking today, all with a tremendous amount of wisdom to impart. Which had a really good conversation prior to joining this, and this is going to be a really good hour, which is going to fly past, no doubt. So first, let me introduce myself. I'm John Jacobs. I'm one of the co-founders of CandidateX. We are newcomers to the HR tech market, having only recently started up during the COVID pandemic. We're a tech and data analytics business, and CandidateX really exists to increase job opportunities to underrepresented and underestimated talent, and to create more inclusive and more diverse workplaces for employers. We've got a fully anonymized talent platform which looks to eliminate biases within the application process and improve hiring practices through diversity data. Our product integrates into TalentNet, which is where the partnership comes in. And TalentNet, since 2013, have been one of the first direct sourcing platforms dedicated to the contingency market. And as a result of their tech innovations and leadership, they now empower some of the world's leading brands to provide job seekers with a seamless hiring experience, bridging the gap between talent acquisition, full-time and contingent labor, the gig economy and the human cloud. So the Future of Work webinar series, this has kind of come about between TalentNet and CandidateX as an initiative to both kind of lead and host the diversity and inclusion conversations that matter. Wanted to provide a balanced thought leadership piece to kind of cut through what can be quite a noisy space. Diversity, equity and inclusion is a multifaceted, and as a subject, it umbrellas quite a lot of evocative subject matters, and we're driven by harnessing our collective experience and expertise and passion for inclusivity and create workforces of the future. So today's subject we're going to be talking about is significant given the shifting landscape over the last few years we've all been through. I'm personally the father of twin girls, and rewinding a couple of years, trying to homeschool 2 5-year-olds whilst starting a new business was fairly intense, and I'm sure we'll hear shortly on both the perspectives of workers and what they're looking for from employers, but also how hiring businesses are adapting to this new world and looking to better attract and retain the caregiving workforce. So before we dive in, just a little housekeeping. We do have a planned Q&A at the end of the session today. All of today's guests are going to be open to fielding questions, so please do make sure you're using the chat function throughout. We'll try and get through as many of those questions at the end as we can. It's going to be hopefully pretty thought-provoking, so please, anything that comes up, just type it into the conversation there, and we'll get to the questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our first thought leader, Dr. Tracy Brower, who's the Vice President of Workplace Insights at Steelcase. Tracy has spoken upon the famous red carpeted TEDx stage, and besides being a regular contributor to Forbes, she's also a published author of some books, The Secrets to Happiness at Work and Bring Work to Life by Bringing Life to Work. So Tracy, the floor is yours, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's such an important topic that we all are discussing today. So I am going to start sharing my screen. I think Sobin, there we go. Awesome. I absolutely believe that I drew the long straw in terms of what I study. They say, whatever you choose to study, make sure you really like it, because you will be talking a lot about it. And when things are upside down and inside out, those are the moments to really think differently and reimagine and reassess and reset And caregiving has really become so salient, so much part of the dialogue, having everything to do with well-being. I'm the mom of two. I'm on the other end from you, John. We had a daughter graduate from college in 2020, read no graduation, and a son graduate from high school in 2020, read no graduation. So wherever we are in that spectrum, we are absolutely there together. And I'm a caregiver to an elderly family member. So one of the things we were talking about as we were getting started is just how much we all share in this journey and how important it is that we are vulnerable, authentic, open about the kind of journey that we're all on. Sometimes we're on top of the world and we can offer support and help to others, and sometimes we absolutely need it ourselves. And I love this. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I also really like the idea that, researching work and life and how those are intersecting, the way that we navigate those, researching those over the years. I really like the idea that you can have it all, just not all at once. And so you may have heard that before. I think it's especially meaningful today as we look at the challenges that we face and all of the ways that we are seeking to be a member of families and communities and neighborhoods and workplaces. So let me start with some myths of caregiving. First of all, caregiving is about children. That's the myth. The reality is that caregiving is all over the map. Caregiving takes so many forms, from caring for elders to caring for family members to caring for partners to caring for neighbors. And so it's so important that we bring everyone along in the dialogue. There are so many organizations who talk about their benefits for people with children. And I had somebody reach out to me on LinkedIn the other day and say, I care for an aging parent and I just don't feel like I have the support that I need. And I don't necessarily feel like I'm even on the radar screen. So I think that one of the things we can do is just really acknowledge that caregiving comes in so many forms. The other thing I think to acknowledge is that how many people provide care. It's not just people who are at the age or life stage where they have young children. There is caregiving going on throughout life stages and throughout careers. And so that makes it an issue for attraction and retention, kind of no matter who we're talking to and no matter what their life stage. The other thing that is absolutely real is that caregiving creates stress and burnout. There is extraordinary research on this. This has been replicated. It's been proven in lots of different circumstances. And that is concerning, and that is part of the business case and part of the human case for us to provide supports. And there is research that caregiving can be extraordinarily rewarding, that caregiving can not only build our skills, but also pay us back, really fulfill us in terms of our relationships, in terms of our feelings of fulfillment in making contributions to people that we love, care about, and who are parts of our community. So I think it's important we talk about the challenges, but also really important that we remember the rewards and validate the rewards that also come along with caregiving. All right, two more myths of caregiving. I think another one we have to be really careful about is that caregivers aren't committed to their work or their employers or whatever they do to put food on the table or pay for housing in whatever form they have it. Actually, caregiver commitment can be extraordinary. And part of that is because caregivers bring so many skills to the workplace. I'll talk about that in a minute, but also because caregivers often see their work as another different way to contribute. People have said over time that when they're caregiving, sometimes work is another place to kind of actually feel a break from the caregiving, to feel fulfilled in ways that don't have everything to do with caregiving, and therefore can be really important places where not escape occurs, but a different type of contribution occurs. And so caregivers can absolutely be fundamentally committed. Even if they have to knock off at 3 o'clock to go to the soccer game, they are very often turning back on after that soccer game is finished, and they're threading work and life in really creative ways. Here's another thing to know. A lot of organizations think that they're solving the caregiver challenges or the caregiver conundrums by offering benefits. And those are great ideas. More different varieties of benefits are really, really supportive of people. And it's not enough. We need to make sure that people feel supported by leaders. We need to make sure that people feel permission to take advantage of their benefits. You know, the culture where I can officially, take off on a certain day or take enough of my vacation or apply my FMLA, but really it's frowned upon. And so it's not just about the benefits, it's about the cultural permissions to take advantage of them. And it's about the broader way of how we define benefits in terms of relationships, ally groups, support groups, mentorship, development opportunities, leadership, and on and on. All right, you all, there is a really powerful business case as well for supporting caregivers. When caregivers are supported, they can bring more of their capabilities. When caregivers are supported, we can attract them powerfully and retain them. Those are becoming benefits that support caregivers, important criteria for whether people choose to join or stay or leave or commit their discretionary effort. It's also really smart to provide for caregivers and make sure that we're paying attention to their needs because of their potential and because they tend to be brilliant performers. These are people who are juggling and they're master jugglers, and they can absolutely bring so much to the work and experience and the work environment. So really good reasons to support caregivers. The other thing that I love to point to is the transferable skills that caregivers bring. I actually wrote an article on this a little while ago, maybe 6 or 9 months ago. There's a brilliant study done by an organization called Incredible, and they looked at the kinds of skills that caregivers develop. And these are some of the big ones. Leading, often without authority, right? Like if you're dealing with the, care facility for your elderly family member, you are leading, you are orchestrating, you are motivating people without direct authority. Caregivers tend to be extraordinarily empathetic, and that is a proven business outcome in terms of innovation, in terms of retention, in terms of productivity, and in terms of innovation. Caregivers are often good at communicating effectively because they have to communicate with so many different stakeholders, from the doctor to the preschool provider to the other parents to the you name it. And time management is super obvious, right? None of these are as obvious as they should be. But oh my gosh, when you think about orchestrating, when you think about how things come together, time management, and for sure stress tolerance, I really like the data on resilience that says that when we're exposed to more challenging situations, we tend to build our resilience muscle. And so when people go through a lot of stress, often they are very accomplished at working through it and dealing with it. And all of these make caregivers important in our environments, important in our workforces. So employers have wonderful opportunities to really take a holistic view of employees, to give employees flexibility. Like I think one of the things we do is we think about what success looks like for an average employee. And we often think it's about, more responsibility, more authority, and maybe more money. And those are the things that we tend to go to. But in reality, we may have different kinds of rewards that we value at different points in our life stage, whether we're early career, whether we're mid-career and kind of juggling it all, whether we're later career. All of those have different implications for caregiving. So how we ask people really specifically what they want, what they value, and how we respond to that is so important. We can also help people make connections and really feel like they are supported and feel like there is empathy on the part of the humans in the organization, as well as on the part of the policies and programs and practices that are a result of that empathy. And I also love to think about the caregivers themselves. I'm a big fan of the model of both agency and structure. Structure, the society, the organization, the policies, the practices, the laws, the norms, the social milieu that we are all part of. we can have an impact on that as leaders. And as individuals, we can absolutely be empowered to create the conditions for our happiness, for our success. And it is a both and for sure. So caregivers can also be part of their own future of work, part of their own success. To understand some of the unconscious biases that can come along with caregiving, there's the parenting bias, like, wow, he's such a great parent, he must not do very much at work, or she's so brilliant in the workplace, she must not be a great parent. That is a real bias that's been demonstrated through evidence. And I think what I like to acknowledge is that the bias may exist, and then we can absolutely work to reduce that bias and bring that unconscious bias to the surface so we can manage it. We can be open about where we're going, about what we're doing. We can reflect our own commitment and reflect our own experience, and that helps others learn and gives others permission to move forward. So I love this as well. Let us live in the shelter of each other. When we support each other, when we show up in important ways, we do the right things for ourselves, but we do the right things for others as well. The biggest way that we influence and learn is through watching, experiencing, and listening to others. And so we all have a role to play in creating the conditions for brilliant attraction and retention and engagement in caregiving situations. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, John, and I know we'll be having an awesome panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Tracy. That's certainly got my mind whirring. I'm probably going to need to rewrite my resume, I think, with some of those skills which I've probably underplayed that I've learned in the last few years of being a dad. But thank you for that. And you've set us up beautifully for the panel discussion. That's great. Thank you. Tracy, you're going to join us, I hope, for the Q&A at the end. So anyone listening, if you've got any questions around some of those things there that were discussed, please do make some comments in the chat and we'll get to those questions at the end. But for now, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel moderator today, Jacqueline Beattie, who's the Vice President for People and Culture at another of our partners, Tundra Technical Services. So Jacqueline, over to you for the panel.
Thanks, John. Thanks again, Tracy. I think that was a great prelude into the conversation and some of the questions we want to cover today, and looking forward to having you back at the end of the session. Before I go into introductions of our amazing panelists today, just a quick brief bio of me. I am a mother of 3 of very different ages, 16, 8, and 2 years old. So we have a lot going on in this household. I am also the partner to a caregiver of an elderly parent. I recently joined Tundra about 4 months ago, but they have been a client of mine at different organizations for 8+ years. Tundra is a total talent management service offering to attract, engage, and retain a global workforce. And we are also the sister company to TalentNet, which is one of our sponsors today. So thanks again for having me. With that, I'm going to turn it over to introductions to our panelists. Kevin, can we start with you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Williams, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the panel today. I look forward to the discussion. I am the Managing Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at American Airlines. I've been with American for about 4 years. And such a pertinent discussion as we look to attract, retain talent in this marketplace, especially with the labor market that we're experiencing around the globe. It's very important that we're attuned and we're astute to all of the needs of our team members. I personally don't have children, but I am caregiver for parents. It's as I continue to age, so do my parents, and it's interesting how you find yourself in situations where you have to now start providing care. So this conversation is very important to me personally as well. So look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Emily.
So excited to be joining this panel. My name is Emily Harborn. I'm the Vice President of Sales at Striver, which is a VR immersive learning platform. And I have spent my career working on tech that helps and dedicating a lot of time to working with organizations around their talent acquisition and retention strategy and supporting caregivers. And the whole panel is all about focusing on supporting these people, and it really lights us all up. So thrilled to be a part of that discussion with everyone today.
Thanks, Emily. Suk, over to you.
Hi, my name is Suk Kaur. Thanks for having me on the panel today. I'm excited to be here. I am a director with Deloitte. I work in the D&I space. I focus on complex intersectionality. So, talking about caregiving and caregiver responsibility today is a passion area. I'm a mother of one. My son is 5 years old. I'm also a South Asian woman who's an engineer. And I am currently living with an invisible disability. So I get the whole concept of feeling belonging and feeling included at different parts or life stages through your career, because you never know, you could wake up one day and something could happen to you. So I'm excited to be here and talk about what it's like to be in the workplace when you are a parent or you're taking care of somebody elderly or even a partner. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Vic. All right, with that, we're going to jump into some of the questions we have today. Just a brief reminder, we are going to host the Q&A at the end of the session. Please drop any questions you have for anyone on the panel into the chat. Also, Tracy and John will be invited back at the end and will participate in Q&A. So if you have questions directly for them, please drop them in the chat as well. So for those of us who are in Canada or maybe lead a global workforce and have Canadian associates, we're probably aware that few provinces and territories require employers to provide paid leave for short-term family caregiving. And the benefits generally don't provide income replacement for short-term leave. So knowing that, Emily, can you kick off the conversation today and talk about, as a parent and or caregiver, what does the perfect work culture really look like?
Of course. Thanks, Jacqueline. I loved Tracy's point about how over the course of our lives, every employee is probably going to have caregiving responsibilities. And so it's really important to think not just about the caregiving that you see, like parenting, and everybody knows about if you have children, but you don't necessarily know if you have someone struggling with mental illness or a hidden disability, or if you have an aging parent at home. It's not talked about the same way. And so it's really important when building your company culture and thinking about the perfect work culture that attracts parents and caregivers, that you are investing in an authentic employer brand and looking for benefits and investing in benefits that truly support your people. So benefits look different for everybody, and the meaningful ones might be important for one person and not someone else. And so I also loved Tracy's point about having support from the leadership as well in a really personal and empathetic way that truly shows that the company has a caring culture. So when a parent or caregiver is looking for the perfect work culture, they want a place where they can be authentically themselves, where they don't have to pretend like they have everything together, where they can be real, genuine. And if they need help, they can raise their hand. And sometimes we're in a position where we can be all the support that everyone needs. And sometimes we're in a weaker position, or maybe we don't have the bandwidth. And it's important to have the kind of tools, structure, and communication internally that let you be real and ask for that help so that you can have the right engagement with your colleagues and so that you can be fully present at work. And so those are some of the things that I would look for in a perfect work culture. It's not one size fits all. And people might have different hours. So a lot of caregivers are just looking for flexibility. And we're giving an example of someone who might need to leave for a soccer game, but is logging in later on, or maybe someone's best hours are early. So having that kind of flexibility to work remotely or in person. Sometimes people need to have less distraction versus they need to be at home so that they can be more present at home. So just having that ability to support the best way that each employee will work so that they can be fully present in your workforce.
Thank you, Emily. Any of the other panelists want to jump in on this question, or shall we move on to the next one? All right. When I was doing research and thinking about this conversation today, I came across an interesting study from the American Senior Communities, as well as the National Alliance for Caregiving. So according to this study, there are more than 43.5 million adults in the United States who have provided unpaid care to an adult or child within the last year. And 34.2 million of these Americans provide care to an adult age 50 or older. Caregivers say they spend at least 24 hours a week on caregiving responsibilities, and most are saying it's an upwards of 40 plus a week on caregiving responsibilities. So when we think about these statistics, what do you feel are the long-term consequences for employers should they ignore this research on the increasing stress and wellness levels of parents and caregivers?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and thanks for sharing those statistics. It's quite compelling, right? If you think about spending 24 hours to 42 hours a week outside of work on caregiving, like, that's 2 jobs if you're thinking about it. So I think the long-term consequences of this is, first and foremost, is do you have a workplace that is inclusive, right? So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, caregiving, whether it's for children, whether it's for your partner, whether it's for elder parents, it is a reality that a lot of us are facing, or will face. So, there's a lot of work going on in the DEI space, and this is, I would say, one of those intersectionalities that does need to be addressed. And as Stacy and Emily have talked about, the benefits are one thing, but also the permission and having the right culture to be able to talk about it in an authentic way and try different things is really important. In the absence of that, you've got employee burnout, right? Showing up at work, they are stressed out. You could have absenteeism or an increase in that. You could have turnover, which we know is costly, and also increases in disability costs. On the worst side, you could have employees who don't realize that they're so overwhelmed and stressed out and are on that stress curve, heading into depression, anxiety, potentially PTSD, which is not something that is good for anybody, either at home or at work. So, less productive workforce, low morale. That's not what you want in a workplace. You want to feel belonging, You want to feel like the people around you and your leaders are listening to you, and have that open dialogue and that safety, that psychological safety, with that open dialogue to say, hey, you know what, there's some stuff going on at home. I want to be committed. I want to be here, but that looks different for me right now. And that doesn't mean I'm not here to do a good job. It just means maybe I need X, Y, and Z. And also giving ourselves permission to kind of take a look at, what is the stress load that we're taking on right now? I often find that as individuals, we're not realistic with ourselves about how much we have on our plate, and therefore what we can take off of our plate, and evolving our own relationship with stress as you go from being a non-parent to being a parent to being someone who takes care of elders. Because as Tracy said, once you have those responsibilities, the number of stakeholders that you're dealing with outside of work, it's phenomenal. Dealing with a healthcare system, right? Dealing with all of these appointments, the skills that you have to have there, it's like you're constantly on. So lots for us to think about. And again, it comes down to one thing. How do we treat an employee as a human being, and realize that their different life stages have different needs, and it's not just benefits that's going to fix the problem. It's that flexibility, and it's that permission to have those conversations, and the caring leadership to help get people through whatever it is that they're going through.
That's great. Emily and so you both brought this up, and I'd like to just dive a little bit deeper. So we know it's not a one size fits all for everyone, and everyone has different needs, and those stages in life, those stages can change as you grow and your personal life changes. How do we as employers or leaders in the industry that have the influence to make change, how do we understand what those needs are of our associates? How do we gather that information?
That's a great question. I think it's so important to have open lines of communication. If you are offering a benefit that you think people will want, if you're not surveying your employees, if you're not having those conversations, if you're not asking, what do you need right now? What is meaningful to you? You might accidentally be investing in benefits that aren't meeting the needs of your team. And then you might end up spending a lot and then having the kind of adoption rate that you were hoping you wouldn't see, kind of lower, and then people not getting their needs met. And so having that active conversation, and I think we've all talked about how important it is for leaders to say, I need to know you. I need to know what you need. How are you doing? Do you need more from me? Do you need more support? So I think it's both surveying your employees and also having a real personal conversation as well. It goes so far to say, I care about you and I want you to be successful here. What can I do to get you there?
Emily, that's beautiful. I think what I'd add to that is also relying on research, right? That is external to the organization. Anything that shows what an employee might need, because sometimes when you're so in it as an employee, you may not know what you need, or you may not be able to articulate it in a way that is going to have the organization help you. So having that conversation, absolutely having the benefits, but also having maybe some industry insights or groups that have gone through this and are maybe on the other end of it. So when they're looking back, they're like, wow, you know what, I was overwhelmed. I couldn't talk about it then, or I couldn't articulate it so well, but I can articulate it now because you've just gone through that psychological phase and you're in, you know, the acceptance stage, and you have a different appreciation of how you might articulate it. So I think it's a combination of both, and being able to rely on that, because I think we may have all been in organizations where there's these benefits that come out and then the adoption rate is low and everyone's sitting back and saying, what happened? Because we didn't ask.
Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
And the only other thing I would add, because I agree with all those pieces. And as we talk about culture and creating a culture that's inclusive, I think one key piece of that is, what do you reward and celebrate, right? So a lot of times what's rewarded and what's celebrated is the person that puts in the long hours, that works overnight and things of that nature, versus really what are the results, right? And really what's the productivity and what's being driven. And as leaders, if you're seeing a difference or a shift with someone on your team, if it's from a productivity perspective, even if it's just from personality coming in, they don't seem like themselves, that you have created this environment and this culture where there's trust and you can go and have that conversation. And as a leader, you're checking in with your team members to see what has changed. And if there has been things that change, what can I do to help and support? But a lot of times team members do not feel feel comfortable enough or the safety to speak up, because they're afraid that it may stifle their growth, right? And we have to ensure that we are not championing just the folks that are putting in the long hours, but also we are championing folks that are speaking up, that are saying what they need and saying when they need adjustments as well, because that's just as important.
I love that, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for weighing in. I will just add, I just think we need to normalize it, right? Like, gone are the days when we're like sneaking out of the office because we have to pick up a kid or take a parent to a doctor's office, or maybe we have a sick pet at home. Like, you don't know what's happening in people's lives. We should just, be telling everyone, or if you're comfortable sharing, yeah, I gotta go. I'm going to my kid's soccer game, and that should be okay. So thank you for that conversation, everyone. Kevin, I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about the candidate. So we've focused a little bit around, our associates, our employees, when they're with the organization and the things we can do to impact them. But what about when we are going through that recruitment phase? So can you speak to when you think is a good time for a candidate to discuss their care responsibilities with a future employer? Is it during the application phase, the interview stage, the offer stage? Is there really ever a good time? Would love your perspective on that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And I know it's often a tough question and a tough situation when candidates find themselves in, to really determine when do they bring this up or what's the appropriate time to do so. I think there's one thing that's very important for us to always consider is, even as a candidate, we are interviewing the employer. And so that's why I think it's very important through the interview process that you start to have conversations around culture. So understanding what the culture is at the organization, because that will give you insight into, really, is this a place that does value flexibility? Is this a place where I can bring my authentic self? But also, too, talking about really kind of what's important to you within that workplace. You may not be 100% comfortable talking about your specific situation, but there are questions that you can ask and things that you can point to understand around, again, the company's philosophy around flexibility, the company's open door policies, the company's asking about engagement scores, right? What were the recent engagement scores that the company had in their employee engagement surveys that they may have recently done? Those are sometimes questions that aren't asked in the interview process, but those will give you signals to the culture of the organization, and if it's a place that you can be your authentic self. Or if you ask a question during the interview process of, is this a place that I can be in my authentic self? Most employers would say yes, but how would I know that, right? What are the cues within the organization that would support that? and being able to challenge it and push to ask those questions, because you want to ensure as a candidate that you're entering into an environment where you feel like you will get the support that you do need. I will say, these are tough and challenging conversations to have, but I think as much as you feel comfortable to be upfront and honest and have these tough conversations through the interview process, it will not be any surprises for you or the employer on the other side when you join the organization. The last thing that I will say as well is, depending on where you are, there are laws where you are around the world. There are laws that even, that support you to ensure that you're not discriminated against for the situations that you must support or live with or deal with at home, right? And so understanding those pieces as well are important to understand that we are working in many environments to ensure that we are creating inclusive environments for all folks. And it's important that you understand that before walking into the door, because what you do not want to happen is to join an organization and feel that you are not in a place where you can be our authentic self or get the support that you need. It will result in many of things that we've talked about before, from low morale to burnout to even possibly depression, to you even looking for other employment. So I think through the interview process as early as possible is the best time to start having those conversations.
100% agree. And that authentic self is something I learned later on in my career. And it's just like this weight that was lifted off me when I finally found out I could just be my authentic self and was comfortable with that. So definitely worth the conversation in that dating phase through the interview session, right? Like, is this a match for me? And is this a match for the organization? Thanks, Kevin. So I think we're all aware of this, and most people that are tuning in today, caregiving isn't just, the basic living tasks of dressing, bathing, eating. Often we're performing tasks that, medical nurses are performing when it comes to thinking about medication and caring for our loved ones. Emily, when you think about caregiving responsibilities, do you really think that employers care enough about this topic that we're having today?
That's a great question. I think that depending on the organization, you'll find a different response, because some companies really, really understand that this is an essential thing that people are thinking about. And I do think that there's a lot more awareness around parents, but caregivers in general are not necessarily solved for as actively. I do think that employers care about their employees, and also if they care about increasing productivity, decreasing stress and burden on employees, and increasing their engagement and employee satisfaction, then they should be investing in this and thinking about it. But I do think that this topic is something that has gotten a lot more airtime over the last few years and a lot more awareness, and it still has a lot of growth in the future to really get to a point where companies are not only just caring about this and realizing that it's something that they should be thinking about, but also actively putting in the work, doing the research, asking their people, putting in the policies, and also having it come from the leadership down, so that the company has a genuine caring environment that they're creating. It's very intentional. It needs to be something that is reinforced from all of the different levels of leadership. And so some employers really care about this and do a tremendous job of demonstrating to their employees, for DEI, for any kind of disabilities, for any kind of caregivers, that they really authentically support them. And then I think that there's a lot of growth still. And I think that there has been a lot of research done about how much this is tied to really great results, and having a diverse workforce being tied to having a workforce that generates fantastic growth and all the numbers that companies want to see. But that's only one part of the equation. It's also about caring for your people so that they feel like they can be real at work, and so that they want to stay. And people who stay are the ones that are going to be growing in your organization. And so I think that that there's a lot of growth yet to do in terms of employers' attitudes and attention towards caregivers. Thanks,
Emily. I was getting a little bit of feedback. Was anyone else getting some background noise with that, or is it just on my side on the panel? You guys were good? Okay, great. So I know I can personally relate to this. I'm happy to say that I think I've overcome it now, but there's still days. There's still days when you may feel ashamed about, the caregiver burden. You may try to hide it. This guilt can, fester into so many different things, and sometimes can, turn to not being able to be the caregiver that you really want to be because of this guilt and shame. So I would love for you to talk about what advice you could give to a parent or a caregiver listening who may be feeling overwhelmed and fearful about raising their concerns at work.
So another great question. And first I will say is probably a really normal feeling that most of us will have in the workplace. So I want to normalize it. I'm an empath and I am a notorious giver in life. So I had to learn how to take care of myself, right? First. So the first piece of advice is when you are feeling overwhelmed is take a step back and figure out what can you do for yourself that will help alleviate maybe some of those feelings. And as I mentioned before, my relationship with stress changed as I, was a woman of color in the workplace, as I became a mother of color in the workplace, and then I was a mother of color with an invisible disability. So I did a lot of my own personal work to understand stress. I worked with something called the Heart Math Institute that's been around for 30 years that talks about the energy renewal grid and where you are on any given moment in a day, right? And also like how to really use your breath to center yourself and bring your heart and your brain into coherence so that then you can really bring your executive functioning and your prefrontal cortex back so that you can think, right? Because sometimes we get really caught up and overwhelmed in our emotions, and that's the hardest piece, right? And we know what it's like as caregivers. We're trying to just juggle so much stuff in life. So I think just taking even a minute or two and learning some of these techniques to say, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Let me name what it is that I'm doing, which is also a skill. We've probably all grown up in cultures or society where, you just shove your emotions down. Well, they're there and it's going to come up in unconscious ways and, it leads to certain behaviors. So getting to know yourself, taking care of yourself and giving yourself permission to take stuff off the plate, I think first and foremost would be my first advice to folks. Now, when it's looking at how do you raise this at work, right? I would say identify the risk of speaking up versus not speaking up. And only you will know what kind of company culture that you're in and also what kind of group you're in and what kind of leadership is there. If you have leadership that is open, caring, honest, and transparent, obviously it's going to be a much easier conversation. But if you have leadership that isn't and is rewarding those 80-hour work weeks, etc., then you really want to give yourself a realistic view into, am I putting myself at risk, right? If I'm speaking up here. Now that says a lot about the culture, but it's a realistic, pro con of what do I say? Ideally, we would like to be working in workplaces where you can speak up, but realistically, not all workplaces are like that. So I wanted to point that out. The second or the third piece is if you are choosing to speak up, right? Take some time to think about how do you approach the conversation, and identify what some of those barriers could be for yourself and maybe for the organization. Have an idea into what some proposed solutions could look like, but be open to, your manager or leader might have a different suggestion, and give yourself permission to experiment and try together. And if you do it in a culture of collaboration, know that some of that might work as you're implementing it, some of it might not work. So don't aim for perfection, aim for, can we try to alleviate what some of these pressures look like? Also, as you're doing that at work, think about what could you be doing at home? Are there certain things that you don't really need to do this week or today that you could push out? You really need, 3 family events, or could you outsource one of those, or maybe not show up to something that could be going on. So taking that holistic view. And then the last piece I would say is sometimes you're in a position where it's not working out, right? You've had these conversations or you're not having these conversations, is know when to exit an organization to protect your own well-being, because it is better to be without a job for a couple of months than it is to stay, get sick, go into depression, have anxiety, have any mental health issues, because coming back from that can be months and it could sometimes be years. And thinking about the trade-off like that. So I know that it's kind of difficult, but that's the advice that I would give for anyone feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, I love that you have to take care of yourself first. That is 100% accurate. And even before this session today, I don't know about you guys, as much as I do public speaking, I still get the anxiety before you come to an event. So I did a quick meditation before I came to the event. And that's what I needed to do, to just kind of ground myself. And everyone has a different, a different way of doing that. And to your point, like find out what is that thing for you? Like, how do you ground yourself? How do you get yourself, to a level head before you start to tackle all these things? Awesome. So Kevin, we've talked a lot about, the effects of not focusing on the importance of caregiving, the results of burnout. It can cause more complex health problems. It can affect, worker productivity and engagement. So when you think about, your organization or organizations that you've supported in the past, what do you feel are the leading indicators for companies to know whether they have a happy workforce?
Yeah, and we've talked about some of the things already earlier today throughout this conversation. One main way is gathering feedback from your team members. Many organizations, even here at American, we call it our American Voice Survey, but it's where we understand the voice of our team members to really understand the sentiment. And then not only understand, but really what actions are we going to take based on the feedback that we hear from our team members to understand how we can impact the work environment. It's important to us from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective to ensure we're creating an inclusive environment, but just in general, from policies to procedures to our approaches to our leaders, right? We ask for specific feedback around relationships with your manager, your comfortability speaking with your manager. And in many organizations that I've worked, we've done the same thing to really understand those sentiments. Another way as well is, and we use this here at American, we have employee business resource groups. We have about 34,000 team members of our 130,000 team members across the globe that are members of employee business resource groups that are specific to communities and affinities within the organization. And so we check in with them, right? Those are great areas of support where we even introduce intersectionality to talk about really how this idea of care really transcends throughout communities, right? And how it impacts different communities in different ways. And so checking in with those organizations and those groups to understand how they're feeling, how their members are feeling, and if there's things that we should be thinking about as a company that's not top of mind for us, and to really push us and drive us to think about our approach, to think again about our policies, and to think about our overall environment to create inclusivity. I will say, a lot of companies focus on turnover, right? But by that time, it's a little too late, right? I think, turnover is that lagging indicator that really is a reflection of the environment that you're creating within your organization. So exit interviews and turnover, those are exit interviews from folks who are leaving are important. It's good to understand why people are leaving, but if you're waiting to that point, it's a little bit too late. So let's start the conversations early. Engagement surveys, stay conversations, especially in the labor market that we're in now. You hear about that more and more, but the ability just for leaders to sit down and have conversations with their team members around what's working and what could be even better. What a better place if you're sitting down with your leader to say, hey, I just want to have a conversation with you about this environment and what's working for you and what we could do better to support you. For you to say, hey, I could use a little bit more flexibility. These are some things that I have going on at home. So I think the more that you can be proactive and have conversations up front with your team members, the more effective you'll be from a retention perspective and really, again, understanding the sentiments of your workforce.
Jacqueline, can I just add to that a little bit? Because I loved what Kevin was saying about intersectionality and also the BIPOC community. I think it's really important to understand some of the cultural perspectives. Like I find when I sit in communities or BIPOC communities, there's a big component about mind, body, soul. Right. And there's also a big component about community. How do we actually operate on a day-to-day basis? So, when you have somebody who's caregiving, that could just be a natural part of how they grew up and they were culturally and socially raised, and they're bringing that into the workplace, right? Which can sometimes be a little siloed with the way that we go about doing work. So understanding that piece and understanding that nuance as it relates to intersectionality and what the needs are of certain communities is really, really important, and not forgetting that, the dominant culture could go about something one way, a South Asian culture could go about it some way, the Black community could do it one way, the Indigenous community could do it another way. And those are all key pieces. And those are all related to identity and what some person could need in any given moment in time. So thank you, Kevin, for saying what you did, because so important.
Absolutely. And I've seen firsthand the results of employee resource groups and how they can impact the organization. So definitely a key topic and a key takeaway from today's discussion. So with that, we're going to move into closing remarks as well as the Q&A session. So thank you everyone for your honesty, transparency, and creating a safe place for us to have this conversation. Before we hand it over to Q&A, I would love to invite John and Tracy back to the conversation. And I would like to ask each and every one of you what you would say is your one key takeaway or advice for your audience today. Emily, can I start with you?
Of course. We've covered so many important things today. I think the key takeaway is caregivers and parents and people in this position are incredible parts of your team and master jugglers, and have grown with patience and empathy and leadership and the ability to manage a lot of things at once. And they bring so much value. And when they're fully supported, then they will be the leaders at your organization and the people who are so loyal to your organization. And so taking the time to think about how to invest in them, being thoughtful about the benefits and the way that you're supporting them is just such an essential conversation, and will help to enrich your company culture and also to make it a better place for not only the people who are actively caregiving now, but also people in the future, to set that really great and inclusive tone.
Thanks, Emily. Great parting words. Kevin.
Yes, well, thanks for the great conversation today. I think one of the main things for me, and one of the main takeaways that was highlighted through the conversation today, that it's important to understand your workforce, understand that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and understand the intricacies and the uniquenesses and the differences that we all bring to the table to make us who we are. So it's important to understand that we all will approach things differently, and we all have different situations, both at home and at work, that we bring to work each and every day, as Silk mentioned. And so how our cultural differences and all those uniquenesses that we bring to the table make us who we are and make our organizations great. But it's important to understand those things and what are those needs, so we can address those. And then the last thing I would say is policy is important, but permission is important as well. As Tracy mentioned, that idea of, such a focus on policies and ensuring that we are creating policies that are inclusive and practices that are inclusive in organizations. But team members and leaders have to have permission to have the conversation. So psychological safety is so important. So don't get lost in just the policies, but let's ensure that your environment reflects what your policies are trying to kind of uphold and support.
Thanks, Kevin. Good.
Another beautiful question. I'll talk to the audience here, and I would start with caregiving. It's a privilege and it's an honor, for those of us who are doing it. Yes, it can seem stressful sometimes, but you get so much out of it. You grow so much as a person, both professionally and, more importantly, personally. So be kind to yourself as you go through that journey. Slow down if you need to. I like to call it sometimes the sacred pause, like really get to know yourself and say what's important to me. And know that the journey is going to count more than the actual destination is. So as much as we have our work identities and we might want to push for that next promotion or whatever it is that we're looking for, taking the time to say, how do I be that holistic person? And how am I bringing my true self and my purpose to the table? Because you can have impact in many different ways. And like Tracy said at the beginning, it's not about getting there fast, right? If you want to get there fast, you go alone. But if you want to get there, go together, right? And that's, I didn't get the quote right there, but that's kind of something, or it was close to what was said. But going slower and going together is always a more sustainable model, especially when it relates to stress and well-being.
You did a beautiful job. So good job. Tracy. Tracy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. I would just be super brief and say, I think we can think big and think small. I think we think big when we think about all of the ways that we support caregivers, from policies and practices to mentorship, to communities of practice, to development opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we want to think small, like how do we address individuals and their unique needs and what success looks like for them individually. At the same time, we're trying to scale, we're trying to be really respectful and empathetic and really targeted in terms of what individuals need. And I think that's where we can build the community most sustainably and successfully.
Thanks, Tracy. John?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we speak to various hiring businesses and, you know, trying to increase diversity in their ranks. And I think what today's conversation has shown is the community of caregivers is often overlooked as a topic of conversation. It's very much a secondary thing. You don't hear it as much. And, you know, we've spoken about intersectionality quite a lot in this. And I think I would encourage hiring businesses to really think about the opportunity they have to tap into this well of talent that exists out there within this kind of underestimated group of people. And that goes for people that maybe have been out of the career for a little while, you know, looking after families and things like that. And just look at the processes that they go to go and attract talent in the first place, to maybe be as open and as approachable as possible. And that goes right down to job descriptions and making sure they're not long wish lists, and making sure that they're really about the accountabilities and the responsibilities of that individual that's coming in. So yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I won't. I'm conscious of time, but yeah, that would be the one key thing. Thanks,
John. And I'll just add that I agree, being a caregiver is absolutely a privilege. Being a leader is a privilege as well. And we have an opportunity to lead by example and really show our workforce that we don't have it all together and that we have lives outside of work. So for any leaders we have on the call today or aspiring leaders, that would be my advice to you. So with that, I am going to kick it into Q&A. We have a few minutes left, so bear with me for a second while I check on the questions. Kevin, there is one directed to you, and it is, can you share one of American Airlines initiatives that is or will be focused on retaining diverse talent relevant to care responsibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, one of the things that we do, and I think we spoke about this earlier, but we do this specifically at American, and we're working to do this even more as we talk about kind of our benefit offerings and our policies and procedures, is really understanding, surveying our organization to understand really what the needs are of the organization, and moving away from kind of these broad-based benefit plans to really more cafeteria style, right? What really works for you and your individual needs. And I think, you know, we're a very large workforce, so it's taking us some time to kind of move into that. But our focus for the future is to ensure that we are meeting the individual needs of our team members, and that you don't feel like you're kind of stuck in this box when it comes to your benefit offerings or the way that the things that you need to care for yourself, care for your family, or care for others. And so again, it's about understanding your workforce, which we are doing surveying, but then building flexibility in your plans to ensure that folks have that flexibility there.
Great, thanks, Kevin. This is a great question. I'm just going to throw it over to the group. Anyone can jump in. With many leaders feeling pressured to have their teams come back into physical offices, caregiving can be perceived as a barrier to their mandate. For TA leaders, how can we better advocate for candidates with responsibilities such as caregiving and empower hiring managers to reduce their biases?
I was going to speak to that because I'm back in the office. So, and it's been a challenge for us, to be honest, right? As we've navigated kind of coming back to the office, as we think about our office-based team members versus our field team members that work in our airports and such, it's really been a balance for us. And what we've done is really empowered our leaders, as we talked about earlier today, around this idea of flexibility, because flexibility looks different for so many people, right? And so, yes, we could have a work from home policy and things of that nature, but that still doesn't meet the intricate needs that I have. And we've talked about the individuality and how important that is. And so we continue to hone in on that about the flexibility of each individual and ensuring that team members feel comfortable being able to speak up with their leaders. Is it perfect? By no means, no. And so we continue to work with our HR leaders to say, as you work with leaders and kind of continue to give these messages, that they understand their responsibility and that we're keeping a pulse on our team member sentiments by doing kind of pulse surveys and check-ins to understand how they're feeling and if they're feeling that idea of flexibility. So it's all about, to us, ensuring that we are having a presence for collaboration here in the office, but we're being flexible to each individual needs versus just one kind of overarching umbrella need of our team members.
I love that, Kevin. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I love that idea of flexibility and empowering our leaders. That's a great tip. So we are at the top of the hour. I apologize we didn't get to all the questions today, but I do hope everyone found this conversation informative, had some key takeaways. I know I did, some things I want to take back to my organization, and just the pleasure of speaking with all of you today. Thank you again. John, I'm going to hand it back to you for closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Jacqueline, and everybody on the panel. Everyone who spoke today, I'm really sure everyone listening is going to have taken away a lot of knowledge and insights from this conversation. It's an important conversation as well. So thank you very much. And everyone who's attended today, thank you so much. We will be sending out a recording to you all. So please do feel free to share it amongst your networks as you see fit. We'll be also sending out a short survey as well, which would be really, really grateful for some of your feedback. As I said at the top of this, is the first of this series. And so we'd really love to hear from you, and we value your thoughts as we kind of ensure this series goes from strength to strength. So we're working hard to build a like-minded community, and we'd be really grateful after this if you could share anything, sentiments or thoughts on today's topic across social media. Please do so. We do look forward to seeing your comments on that. And lastly, just I guess before we check out, just a small thing from me. I guess it'd be remiss of me not to mention CandidateX's Better Human initiative, which is a social impact pledge that we've made to do more than just talk the talk and actually walk the walk in the D&I world, to proactively affect change. And as such, this weekend I've rather foolishly chosen to run the London Marathon. So for a very special charity, I'd say. So I'm supporting a charity that funds vital research into life-limiting diseases and illnesses into newborns and children. So I will be sharing my fundraising link after this. So any change you can muster is hugely appreciated. It'll certainly keep me focused on my way around on Sunday. So look, that's it from us. I hope everyone enjoyed the session today, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.